By now, most of you might have learned that Selenium is the most widely used automation testing tool. But you might not be aware that you can use various frameworks in Selenium to optimize your code structure. So my name is Vardhan, and in today's session, I'm going to talk about what is a Selenium framework, what is the need for it, what are the benefits that you'll get out of implementing a Selenium framework, and of course, I'm going to talk about these three types of Selenium frameworks: data-driven testing framework, keyword-driven testing framework, and hybrid framework. I hope the agenda was clear to you people. So let me get started. We need to use a Selenium framework because finding and fixing a very small bug in a million-line code is insanely challenging. And besides, as a Selenium tester, we need automation, right? We need automation in places like fitting the data to the data script. Because how many times will you have a single data script in which you'll be manually changing the data? How many times will you feed different data to your data script to make sure that different test cases succeed? You need automation for that reason. And you need your code to be simple. You should be able to understand your code. And if you have a bug, you should be able to easily and efficiently fix that bug, right? For these reasons, you need to use a Selenium framework. I'm pretty sure I'm not making too much sense right now. So let me go forward and explain what I'm talking about in more detail. But before I go forward, let me tell you what are the benefits of a Selenium framework. First and foremost, when you implement a Selenium framework, there is increased code reusage, which is a very, very good thing, because if your code is too big, you will have a problem understanding your code. Smaller the code, the better. And when we say code reusage, it means that you will have a small piece of code for a particular functionality. And at a later point of time, if you need to use the same functionality, then you can call that particular code instead of rewriting that same code, right? You can reuse that code which you've written earlier. That's the benefit. The second benefit is that there is improved code readability. It means that when your code is smaller and it follows the framework pattern, then your code is more readable. There's unwanted complexity. For every single functionality, you will have a small piece of code. And if you want to modify any functionality, if you want to modify the test for a particular functionality, you need to only modify a small piece of code. And modifying that small piece of code will not have any dependency on other parts. If you're having one single test script in which you're testing 5 different functionalities, then the code is going to be pretty huge, right? By making changes to one part of the code, you might be affecting other parts, right? The other functionalities. So you can avoid that by breaking the entire code into smaller parts of code and then testing them. The next benefit is that with the help of a Selenium framework, there is higher portability. So if you have a smaller piece of code, that code can be moved easily to another package or to another project, or if you want to just use it later for some other purpose, you can do that. There's no stopping you. And most of all, your script maintenance is going to be very, very simple, because if there is something that you want to change, you'll be changing only that part. And that will not affect anything else in your code, because it's going to be a very small class or a small method in a small test case which you will have to modify. Nothing more, nothing less. Right? So these are some of the benefits of a Selenium framework. And now that you people have understood this part, let me go forward and start off with our actual topics. Okay? Let's start with what is a Selenium framework. And as it says here, a Selenium framework is just a code structure to make your code maintenance simpler and to make your code readability better. And there are various frameworks that we can use. Like I said earlier, we have something called as a data-driven framework. We have a keyword-driven framework, and we have a hybrid framework. So a data-driven framework is a technique wherein you will be separating your test script and your data set. So whatever data you want to feed, that will be separated from your actual test case. Okay. And a keyword-driven framework is something similar, but yet different. The difference is that instead of separating the data set from the test script, we will be separating the methods which need to be executed in that same test script. So you have a test script and the methods which need to be executed in this test script to make sure you're testing the application, those methods will be stored separately. That's it. That is the only difference. And then we have hybrid framework, which basically implements the best features of both of these frameworks. Okay. So these are the types, and let me get started with explaining each of them one after the other. And of course, I'm going to give you a demonstration. Okay. So let's start with a data-driven framework. A data-driven framework is a testing strategy in which the data set under test is stored separately from the test script. Let's take an example of me logging into a web application and I want to test that success. Okay. And if I want to basically achieve automation, then what I'm going to do is I'm going to separate the data set In my case, the data set is going to be the username and the password fields, correct? These details, if I have, let's say 10 or 5 sets of these login credentials, I will store them separately in a different file. In my case, I'm going to store it in an Excel file. And basically my test script will only contain the functionality to test the web application, and whenever it needs data to enter into the login button or into the password button, then it would fetch it from the Excel file and then feed it over there and then continue with the execution of the test. Okay, so that's how simple that is. And the big benefit with implementing this data-driven framework is that your automation testing here is driven by your data set. So basically at a later point of time, if you want to change the data set, you can do it without affecting your code. Okay, you just need to go and edit your Excel file and nothing more. You can have 50 credentials there, you can have 100 credentials there, you can have any number, and that's not going to impact your code here. Okay, and the best part is the same script is going to be used for n number of tests. So having said this, let me go to the next slide and ask you this question here. Can Selenium WebDriver read data from an Excel file for input? Because that's what we're trying to achieve here, correct? And the answer for this is no. Selenium WebDriver cannot on its own read data from an Excel file. And then will come the next question. You can ask, if it cannot read, then how will we feed the data from the Excel to the WebDriver? Correct? That's a brilliant question. And the answer to that is we can use an external tool called Apache POI. Okay? You can use Apache POI for both reading and writing operations on Microsoft files, not just Excel files. Okay? So Apache POI is an open source tool, and it's a library which is nothing but a set of programs or a set of functions which allows us to read, create, or edit these Microsoft documents using Java. Okay, so let me go forward and get to more details. This is going to be the demo that I'm going to show you. Okay, I have my Excel file here, something similar to this. In one column, I have my username credentials, and in the other column, I have my password credentials. And these two need to be sent as a pair to my program to execute my test. And as part of Apache POI, there is something called as a data provider function. And this data provider function is what I'm going to use to basically read my data from the Excel file. Okay, this is the method which is going to do that for me. Let me explain this code, but before that, let me go and open up my Eclipse, which is going to be the IDE where I will be working. And on this Eclipse IDE, let me give you more details. So this is my Eclipse, and I have this project here, right? Selenium Frameworks demo. So this is my project, and inside this project, I have 3 packages. One is for data driven, the other is keyword driven, and the third is hybrid framework. So I will be showing you a demonstration of these 3. Okay, so let me open up data driven first and open up these 2 classes, which is going to be my demo. Now, the DDT-Excel.java class, right? This is going to be my main class or my main test case, which is going to do the functionality. But just to read data from an external Excel file, I've written another class. And here I've used Apache POI functionalities. Okay, so I've used this XSSF workbook and XSSF sheet. Now, these 2 are very prominent libraries or let's say functions that come with Apache POI. I'm using them to read my Excel sheet and then get data from there. Let me first start off by explaining this main class of mine. Okay, so here what I've done is I've imported these set of libraries. These are very simple, and you should know why I've imported them. So let me just minimize this, and coming to my class. So basically the first thing I've done in my class is I have created a Chrome driver object, and I've created this outside because I want to do it globally. Because all my other functionalities, all my other methods, which is containing the functionality to perform the test, they all have @test annotations. And because I cannot have my Chrome driver inside one of these annotations, I have defined it globally outside. And coming to the next line, I have an @test annotation to basically execute my method here, and my method is demo project. Okay, and to this demo project method, I will have to provide my username and password credentials. So I've used the driver.findElement command to pass the username and the password credentials to my WebDriver. Okay, I have specified that I want to perform the test on this particular URL, and I've of course set the system property over here. Okay, and most importantly, I have mentioned that the data provider for this is test data. So what this means is there is an external method, and the method which has the annotation name as data provider will be the method that will be passing the username and password credentials to this particular method of mine. Okay, so @test is the annotation here, and if you come down, I have another method here, right? Public object. So this method has been annotated with data provider. So this means that the username and password credentials will be read by this method and passed to this particular method of mine. Okay, guys? And basically everything else is very simple. So once I've passed it to my WebDriver, I'm just trying to log in by pressing the click button, and then I'm waiting for some time till the entire functionality takes place, and I'm verifying if my login is successful or if it's not successful. I'm doing that by getting the title of my web page. So when I log in, this is going to be the title. Okay, this is supposed to be the title of the web page. So what I obtain and store in this get title variable, if that matches this, then my test is a pass, right? If it does not, then it's invalid. And after that, I have another small method which is basically to terminate my session. So I've used an after method annotation for that. Let's say when all the methods get completely executed, that time this will be executed and my program will quit. Now let me go to this part of my program, which is nothing but the data provider, and explain you how I'm reading data into this method. So I've created this method as an array. Okay, and here what I'm doing is I'm calling my second class. So the read Excel file here, right? So this is a class, and as you can see, this is the same read Excel file class, and I'm creating an object instance of that class. And as you know, this is the rule to create an object, right? And while creating an object of this read Excel file class, I am passing the place where my login credentials are present. So the Excel file is called as login credentials.xlsx, and it's present in this path. So I'm just feeding the path. Okay, so basically when this class is called from that method, it's called along with the Excel path, right? It's passed with some parameters, and that is what is received over here. Now the funny thing that you might notice here is there is another method that I've started with the same name as the class. So when you have a method in your class which has the same name as your class, then that's called as a constructor. Okay, so it's not technically a method, it's basically a constructor which has the same name as my class name. So this constructor has the path where my Excel file is present. Okay, and here I'm just using a try catch block to catch any exception if it arises. Okay, and what I'm doing is as you can see, there is something called as XSSF workbook and XSSF sheet, right? Now these two are inbuilt libraries that come with Apache POI, and I have created objects for those. Okay, objects with web and sheet. So these are the two names. So for XSF workbook, which will help me deal with the Excel workbook, and this would help me deal with a particular sheet in that Excel file. Okay, so the object name for that is sheet, and for this is WB, and I've just initiated that process here. Okay, so I've created a new file here, and I've fed the file name, the file path over here. And again, this file input stream is a function that we get with our Apache POI library, right? So if there is any problem here, so ideally there should be no problem. Okay, but if there is ever any problem in reading this Excel file, then that would be thrown as an exception. So program termination would not halt, but it would be just thrown as an exception at the end of the program. Whenever the execution is complete, that time the exception would be thrown. Okay, and it would be thrown with the help of this println statement that makes it displayed. But getting back to the main method which actually does my reading. Okay, so that is done over here. So I have two methods, which is string get data and int get row count. Okay, so two methods, get data and row count. I'm using the get row count method to basically find out how many rows are there in my Excel file, because that will be used to define the number of times I will read my Excel file, because I will be running a for loop, right? If you go back to here, you can see that I'm running a for loop to basically execute multiple login credentials. So how many ever login credentials are present in my Excel file, that many times this for loop would be executed. Okay, and then I have a get data method which would basically take the sheet number, row and column as parameters and use that to read my data inside the cell. Okay, so this is to basically read the data inside my cell. So you will not understand this method if I do not go back to my main class file. Okay, so let me go here and explain every single line one after the other. So I'm creating a new object called rows. So here I'm getting the value of my row count. Okay, but when I want to find out the number of rows that are there, I have to also specify the sheet number. So that is why you can see a 0 over here, correct? So if I go here, you can see that this is the login credentials and the name over here is sheet 1. Okay, but the index is ideally 0. So this is sheet number 0, right, index wise. So this is what I've passed as parameters when I'm calling the getRow method. Okay, and when I'm calling this method, I would come here and the same sheet number 0 would be brought in as the input. Okay, so I'll be using the sheet number to identify how many rows are there in that particular sheet. So this is the logic that I have used to find out the number of rows. So I've said int row is equal to wb.get sheet at with this sheet index. Okay, so wb has the path and the excel file which has the credentials, and it will go to this particular sheet having index number of 0, and it would get the number of the last row. Okay, so get last row number is again an inbuilt library which would obtain what is the number of the last row. So if I go here, the number would be 0, 1, 2, 3 and 4. Index wise it's 0 to 4, and 4 is what would be present here. And what I'm doing is I'm saying row is equal to row plus 1, which would make it row is equal to 5. Because I have a 5 credentials, I cannot give the entry as 4 over there because index starts from 0. Because it starts from 0, I have just appended 1 manually. Okay, and then I'm basically returning this value of row. So that value of row would be stored in this particular object. Okay, now the next thing that we are doing is we are creating another object for storing the credentials. I'm creating a 2-dimensional array where I'll be storing both the username and the password as a 2-dimensional array. Okay, this is the name of the object. So the size of the object is going to be controlled by this 2-dimensional array, right? So the number of rows is going to be the number of rows that is obtained and present in this object, and the number of columns is going to be 2, because if you go back to my Excel, of course there are just 2 columns. So that's going to be the size of my 2-dimensional array. Okay, row size by column size. And to basically read the data from each and every single cell, I am writing a for loop wherein I'm running a for loop for the number of rows that are present, and I'm increasing it every single time. And every time I'm reading a particular cell, I'm reading it for the ith row and 0 column and ith row and first column. So when my I is equal to 0, it starts from I is equal to 0, right? So at that time, it would pick up the value in cell number 0 and 0. So index wise, the value of this cell is 0 and 0, right? This is 0 and 1. So if I want to pick up the data in this cell, then I would say get me data which is present in ith row and 0 column and ith row and first column. And when I say first column, it is this, right? And this would be asked when this get data method is being called. So the get data method is called with these parameters, which means that get the data that is present in this format: 0th sheet number, ith row and 0th column. And again over here it would be 0th sheet number, ith column and first ith row and first column. And the credentials here would be basically returned to this particular data provider annotation, right? To this particular method it would be returned. So that's how it's going to work. But how is my get data here reading the cell value present in this particular cell? That we can see from here. Okay, so get data method is there here, and it would receive 3 parameters like I told you before: sheet number, row and column. And what I'm saying here is I'm creating a new object again, sheet, wherein I'm going to say get the sheet number, where I'm saying access this particular sheet number using this library wb, which is my Excel file, get sheet at sheet number. And once I've accessed this sheet number, I'm saying create a new object called data, which is of type string, and store this data. Get the row value of this row and what's passed here, and get the cell value of this column. Okay, the column that is passed over here, right? So get that value and return it back to this method. Okay, so I'm just using return data for that. And basically the method whichever is calling this one would get back the values. And since the method which is calling this method is my test data feed, this would get back the values and it would store it in this 2-dimensional credentials array. And from the credentials array, it would go back to my test annotation here, which is my first method. called demo project. Once it's received over here, the username and password, it would basically be passed whenever it's needed. Okay, and my web application would get the login and password fields like that. So that's how my code is structured. All right, so let me execute this program and show you how the demo works. So I'm just clicking on this run button here, and let's just wait for my Chrome to open. Here we go. Chrome browser instantiated, and this is my first test case, right? It was Edureka, and the password was fed. Chrome browser closed, and again my Chrome browser is going to reopen. And it's going to basically check for every single credential. It's going to check if I can log in or not. If it logs in, it means that the credentials are valid. Otherwise, the credentials are invalid. Okay. So the first two succeeded, I could log in, but the next three, I can, however, not log in, right? My login has failed over here. And that's what we would get in my test result. It would say that 3 credentials failed. So let's just wait up for that. So there we go. My 5 different test cases successfully executed. And if I pull it up, it shows that the number of tests run were 5 and there were 3 failures. That's because I manually gave wrong credentials over here. So these 2 are valid credentials and these 3 are invalid. So that is the inference that we get from this particular test. Okay. So that is the demo for my data-driven framework. If you do have any doubts, please put them in the comment box. And you can also look at the description below because there's a link to a blog where I've explained the same concept. And if you want to pick up this code, you can pick up the code from that particular blog of mine. Okay. So in the meanwhile, let me just move on to my next topic. And my next topic is keyword-driven framework. We saw what a data-driven framework is. And a keyword-driven framework is slightly different in the fact that you still have an Excel file, but in the Excel file, you're not feeding data, but you're feeding the methods which need to be executed. Suppose, let's say I have 5 different methods in my test script. Okay, and in this test script, I don't want to execute all 5. I can have a new Excel, and in that Excel, I can say just the 3 methods which I want to execute. And when I execute this test script, then it would only test those 3 methods which are mentioned in this Excel file. Okay, so that's how it works. That's what a keyword-driven framework is. It helps you control the methods that you want to execute in your test script. Again, it's very similar in the fashion that you have an external file where it will be stored, and the Excel file can be used, or you can have database, or you can use an XML file. You can use one of these 3. I have used an Excel file for simplicity. And again, the benefits and the features are very similar. If you want to control the number of methods you want to execute, you can easily do that by just removing or adding those method names to your Excel file. And this is how it looks like. So I have 2 columns. One is description and the other is keywords. And these action keywords, these are my set of methods which I want to execute. Now the same test that I performed some time back, right, with data-driven framework, I'm going to perform the same login test. So basically, if I want to run a test which is very similar to the test I showed you some time back, what are the functionalities that I need to test, right? So I have to first of all instantiate a Chrome browser. That's one functionality I would have to write in my test. I would have to specify the URL on which I want to perform the test. I have to specify the elements. In my case, it would be the username field and the password field. And then I have to be able to click on the login button. I have to be able to verify the login, and then I have to close the browser, right? So these are the different functionalities I want to test. And that's what I have done here. So instead of having one single test case where I have written the entire code for these things, I've broken down that into multiple methods. Okay. And the methods look like this. And the methods I can call from one more file over here. So I have the method names specified as keywords here, and these method names have smaller functionalities. For opening or launching my browser driver, I have the open browser method. For navigating to a particular web page, I will have one more method. For passing the username credentials, there's one method, and similarly for each and every functionality, I have a separate method. And these methods will be called from my main file, from my main class file. Okay, and this is how it looks like. The method is the name of my class where the functionality is present. Okay, I've written the code to test it, and I'm basically calling these functions with some parameters. Okay, so let me quickly go to my Eclipse and show you a demonstration of this very same. So let me first close these 2 files which I do not need. These were for data-driven framework. And now going to keyword-driven framework, let me open up these 3 files. Okay, data script is going to be my main file which will control the execution. But along with that, I have a methods class in which I've specified the different functionalities I want to test. And I have a read Excel data, which is again going to read my data from the Excel file, which is the Excel cells, and it would pass that back to my driver script. Okay, so this is my main file. And it's a very simple class where I've created one variable, and here I've stored the path where my Excel file is present. Okay, and my Excel file is dataengine.xlsx. Let me just quickly open up that file and show you. This is my Excel file. Like I told you, these are the methods which I want to execute, and this is just a small description, which is of course not relevant or needed for my test. It's just for your understanding purpose. I've just said what each of these methods do. These will be the ones that will get executed. And the next thing I've done is I've called the read Excel data class. Okay, so this is the read Excel data class, and this has a couple of methods. Set Excel file is one method, and get cell data is one more method inside this class. Okay, and what I've done here is while calling this class, I've said execute this set Excel method. Okay, calling this method with these parameters spath and sheet1. So sheet1 is basically the name of my sheet number. Okay, and spath is the path. So I'm setting what I want to read. Okay, when this is basically executed, then it would call this method, and this method will receive the path of where my Excel is present, and it would go to the sheet name. So the sheet name present over here is sheet1, right? So let me open up the Excel and show you that sheet1 is the name. So it would straight away come to this particular Excel file, and it would start reading data, or it will be ready to read or write data in this particular Excel sheet. Okay. And here again, I've used XSF workbook and XSF sheet, right? As you can see here, I've used them to basically read my actual data. So they are the ones that contain the smaller libraries which would do actions like reading the cell and obtaining that cell value and storing that cell in a different variable. Okay, so I've created separate static objects for them, and I'm calling them inside this particular Excel file of mine. So how the logic works here is the path and the sheet name comes in from the calling method. Okay, and when that comes, I am creating a new object called Excel file. Okay, and the same file that is mentioned over here, that would be stored in this object. Okay, and in this Excel file, I'm using this as a base to create another object, which is Excel workbook. And here I'm just saying I want to use the XSF workbook functionalities on this particular Excel file. So that's why I'm creating this particular object. Okay, so this acts as a class for this particular object of mine. And finally, I've created one more object for which this would act as the class. Okay, so whatever I'm saying here, right, there's Excel workbook, there's Excel W sheet. So I'll be using this Excel W sheet to write the sheet name of this particular Excel file. I'll be accessing this sheet name in this Excel workbook, which is present in this particular path. So that is what this piece of code does for me. Okay, this method, which is setting the Excel file and getting my environment ready for me. That is about this method. So let me go back to the driver script and continue with my explanation. So right after setting my Excel file, I am starting a for loop here. And I'm starting a for loop to basically read all my Excel column contents. So whatever method names I've specified in my column, I want to read those things, right? So for that, I've created a for loop, and I've hard coded the value that run the for loop 7 times. Because if you look at my Excel, I have 7 entries here, correct? Count as 7. So I want to run the for loop 7 times, but start the execution from row 1, because row 0 is not something I want to execute. It's just a header. So these are the ones which I want to execute. So this is row number 1. So start executing from this row. And this time I'm creating a new object called sActions, having data type string. And I'm again calling this same read Excel data file, right? This read Excel data class. And from this class, I'm executing this method, get cell data. Okay. And when I'm calling this get cell data method, I'm passing the row number and the column number of the particular cell I want to read. So I want to read the cell number which is executed as part of the for loop. So when the first time this for loop is executed, then I will be reading row number 1, column number 1. Okay, because row number is mentioned as 1 over here. That's where it starts off with. And the second time when this for loop is running, I will be reading row number 2 and column number 1. Because if you go back to my Excel, the column number is the same and the row number is what changes. So 1 1 21, 31, 41, 51, 61, 71. That's how it goes. Okay. And every time I open this and every time I call this particular method, I'm passing these values, right? So this method would get called. And when this method is called, the same row number and column number is received as parameters. Okay. And these are used to basically read the cell contents. But how am I doing it? By creating a new cell object. And here I'm saying the Excel worksheet, choose this worksheet, and over here, go to this particular row because this worksheet has this sheet name, right? So go to that particular sheet name and sheet number. Go to this particular row, which is nothing but row number 1, and go to this column, which is nothing but column number 1. And once you're there, I have written the next line, string cell data. Okay, so this is the next object, which is of type string, and here I'm saying cell dot get string cell value. So whatever value is there in that particular cell, that is obtained and stored in this particular cell data object. And then I'm finally returning this cell data to the calling object or the invoking method. So the method that is invoking this method is this object, right? So that value would come in here. And every time the value is returned here, there's an if statement which is executed. Okay. And here we have manually specified if the value that is returned, if it is equal to open browser, then execute the open browser method which is present in the class called methods. So methods is this class of mine. So like I told you, this is the place where I've defined the WebDriver object here. So for open browser method, I have instantiated the browser driver. Okay, and this would be defined globally because driver is again declared globally. And the next method over here is the navigate. So if I want to go to a particular web page, then I would say go to this particular URL, and that would be inside this particular navigate method. And similarly, I have another input username method, which is for passing the username field my credentials. And similarly for password field, there is one more method. This is the credentials which will be passed on. And then to click on the login button, there's another method, click underscore login. This would login and click. This would basically login by clicking. And finally, it would verify if my login is successful by analyzing the page title. So I'm saying get the page title and store it in this particular variable. Okay, that is of type string. And this is evaluated with this find a flight Mercury tours because this is the page title, and this would be verified with this. And if it is matching, then it basically means that your test case passed, your login credentials is correct, otherwise it's invalid. So that's the logic here, right? That is what happens here. And then finally I have one method for close browser, which would just end my browser instance. So each of these are separate methods, and each of those methods would be called via a for loop over here. So the first time the for loop executes, it would check if it is equal to this open browser. If it matches, then the open methods dot open browser, this method would be executed and called. And the second time when the for loop is being executed, it would technically be reading this cell, right? It would be reading the navigate cell. And since that is not equal to the open browser, the next if statement, the else if statement, where I'm saying if that equals to navigate, and if it's matching with this navigate, then it would execute the next method navigate inside this class called methods. Okay, so this class contains all my methods like I told you, and this navigate method inside this methods class would be executed. And similarly, there's a for loop which would execute each and every single method which is present in the Excel file. It would compare it with each of these here, and if there's a match, then that particular method will be executed. Okay, and then basically I'm just ending this for loop right over here only. Okay, so that's how this logic is, that's how this works. So let me quickly execute this driver script file and then show you how this demo works. So my Chrome driver has opened up. So all my functionalities are being tested, right? My driver opened, my username credentials was passed, I've been logged in successfully, and then it would have by now retrieved the page title and it would have analyzed. So let me pull this up. And yes, I've not got any error. That means that my test has successfully passed. So I don't have any test annotation here to show you that if my test passed or if my test failed. Correct? So I do not have that. So that's why you didn't see any failure there. So anyways, that shows my code is executed successfully, and that's how you perform keyword driven testing. So guys, I hope this was clear to you people. And if you guys have any doubts, then I would request you to go back to the link present in the description below to read more about how this keyword driven framework works. And also if you want to get this code, you can do so from the same blog link. And let me, in the meanwhile, go to the next slide and talk about the next topic. So the final topic is hybrid framework. And hybrid framework is basically using a combination of both the features of both data driven and keyword driven, right? So let me quickly go to the demonstration and show you how I'm going to perform this hands-on. So I have built this hybrid driven framework in a way which is very similar to the keyword driven framework, but I am passing the method names by using the data driven framework. Okay, this might be a little confusing to you. So just listen again to what I'm exactly saying. What I'm exactly doing is the same Excel file that we saw, right? The data engine Excel file. So we have different methods. So what I'm going to do here is I'm not going to write if else conditions every time to execute each of these methods. Okay, so I'm just going to write a for loop and I'm going to use the data driven framework technique to execute each of these methods whenever there's a match. So I hope that made a little more sense to you. A combination of data driven and keyword driven. Keyword driven because at the end of the day, my method names are present in an external Excel file, and it involves a data driven framework because these method names are read from this Excel file by using the data driven technique. Correct? My Excel file, my class file is reading this data with the help of data driven framework. If you guys have not understood this, then just wait up till I bring up my Eclipse. Okay, over there I will explain it better. But before that, I just want to tell you that to achieve this, I have used a Java reflection class. So a Java reflection class is used to import your methods in one class onto another class. So I have a class 1, which is my main class, and if I want to import the methods which are there in class 2 onto my class 1, then I can use the Java reflection class. All right. And these are the two lines of code which does it for me. So actions is the name of my class, which contains the list of methods, right? So it contains the functionalities of different methods, and I'm importing these methods onto my new object. Okay, because I'm executing or starting instantiating an object instance of this particular class in my second class. Okay, so let me just open up the Eclipse and explain this better. So this is my Eclipse. I'll just close all these files here. And this time let me open up hybrid framework package and open the 3 files here: actions, JavaScript, and read Excel. So very similar to keyword driven framework, we have JavaScript Java file, which is my main class, which would be doing all the functionalities. Okay, my actions is the one which is going to contain all my methods, again very similar to my keyword driven, and the read Excel will be the one which will be reading the cell values from the Excel sheet. The very minute difference that this particular class file has when you compare it to the keyword driven data script file is that instead of me using the if else to call the different methods, right, I am using a for loop to call those methods. And since I'm using a for loop to access or get data from an Excel file, the data driven framework technique is implemented. And since the data which I'm getting from the Excel file is the name of the method, the keyword driven framework is also implemented. Okay, so that's how things work. So I don't think I have to explain you actions and read Excel files again, okay, because they are exactly the same. The only difference is over here. And what I've done here is I've first of all used the Java reflection class, as in, so this actions which is there over here, right, this class, I have created an object instance of this particular actions class. And this is defined globally outside because it can be used by even other methods in this particular program. So once I've created an object of this particular class, I'm using the method variable or the method object to get the class and the methods which are there in this particular action keywords. Okay, so the action keywords refers to my action class, and in this action class, whatever methods are there, that would be obtained. So get class dot get methods is the key term which is used for that purpose. Okay, and by now all the different methods would be stored in this particular method as array. So if I go back to actions, you can see that the different methods I have here is close browser, verify login, click login, input password, input username. I have navigate and open browser, right? So all these methods would be stored in this particular method object, this array. And what I've done next is I've started a for loop, and this for loop will run as many times as the number of methods that are there in this particular object. What is the length? Let's say if there are 7 methods over here which are imported to this particular object, then the method length would be 7, right? So this for loop would run 7 times. Basically the number of methods that were imported. Method.length is the function for that. And it would start from 0 and it would execute that many number of times. And it would keep running. And every time the for loop runs, it does one simple thing. And every time it would basically obtain the method name, and if it equals whatever stored in S actions, that would be executed. But if I have to explain this, let me first complete this part. And in this main function, what I have is I've first created a variable, and here the path of my Excel file would be present. This you of course know. And of course the sheet name is also present. And then there's a for loop that gets executed, right? And this for loop, it would be executed the number of times there is a row. So for the number of rows that are there, that many number of times the for loop would be executed, and every time it gets executed, it does one simple thing. Okay, it reads the value by using the get cell data method. Okay, inside the read Excel class, get cell data method is there here. It would pass the values, the row number and column values, and it would read the cell value and store it in S actions. Okay, and after storing it in S actions, it would execute this actions method. So that's when basically this method will be executed. Okay, so I explained this part, and getting back to what happens inside the for loop, and for every single method that is present, right? So it would first get the name of the method. So for method number 0, it's going to get the name of the method, and it's going to check if it is equal to what is there in actions. So in S actions, the first time the value that would be stored is open browser. Okay, and over here when we say if method I dot get name, then method number 0 would be compared with this S actions. So the first time when it's comparing, method number 0 would be open browser itself, because if you go to actions, the first method is open browser, right? So that would be compared over here, and if it is equal, then this line would be executed, and the line here is method I dot invoke actions keywords. So this basically means if it's a match with respect to what is there in the Excel file, then execute that particular method. It will execute that same action keywords, right? And moment it's executed, it would break the functionality. And since there's no else part, this if method will be executed once again. So the next time this for loop gets executed, and then when this is called, right, execute actions is called, that time what happens is it would be basically checking for navigate method. So that time for method number 0, it will not match S actions variable, because the first time S actions will not contain that. So for method 0, S actions will not match because S actions contains navigate, right? So that is what is obtained from the Excel file, and navigate would be present the second time this if method executes. And when it executes, basically this method would be invoked and it would be executed, right? So just like that, every single time if loop runs, a particular method will be executed, and every time a method is executed, the functionality of the web application is tested. Okay, so I have the different methods over here which would be involved in this for loop are these very same, and these would be executed. So let me just run the sample program for you and show you how this works. So again, it's going to be very similar. My Chrome driver is instantiated. I've logged in, and once my login is verified, my Chrome browser is supposed to close, and that's what has happened. So let me just pull up the results and show you what has happened. And yeah, there are no errors, which means that my test is a success. Okay, so that is what I wanted to show you, and that is what I wanted to tell you basically. So that is how I have built a hybrid driven framework. Okay, so if you guys again have any doubts, I would request you to please go to the link present in the description below. That is the blog I've written on the same WebDrivers. So that is the same blog I've written on these frameworks, and you can access this same code from that particular web page. Okay, so yeah, perfect. So that brings an end to my demo session, and let me just go back to my slides and conclude today's session. So I would like to thank you guys for watching the video till the very end, and if you guys have any suggestions, please drop them in the comment box. And also if you have any queries, please drop them in the same comment box, and my team or I will myself get back to you at the earliest. And on that note, let me conclude today's session. Happy learning from Edureka.
I hope you have enjoyed listening to this video. Please be kind enough to like it, and you can comment any of your doubts and queries, and we will reply them at the earliest. Do look out for more videos in our playlist and subscribe to Edureka channel to learn more. Happy learning!